I'm going to help us walk through the humorous humility tests. There are 10 questions there, and I hope you've tried to take the test so that we can enjoy together the interpretation of the test. All right, you got your test in front of you? Question number 1 says, are there people joining us for this test? No, I don't think they have it. Okay. Maybe if they are joining us, they just have to listen to what the question is so that maybe they can join in too as well in the discussion. Here's the question. You help another person save a child from a burning building, and then you left the scene. The next day, the press is calling you the hero or sheroes of the scene. Would you set the record straight or not?
Are the he or the she or the one or two?
Would you set the record straight if somebody say, okay, you are the hero of the, of the day, or shero of the day? Would you set the record straight? Why or why not?
It depends on how much help you provide.
It depends on how much help you provided, okay? You would like to share the credit too, right? Huh?
Help another person, so it's like, at least you can share.
Okay.
I think the social norm is to deny that you're a hero and to make it clear that everyone else was really the hero.
Thank you for being so honest. When people want to heap such recognition on you, say, oh, no, I'm just doing my job, right? I just happened to be there, right? Why you want to do that? Why do you want to do that? Why would you say that? Is it an attempt to help somebody see you as very humble or what?
Somebody else at that position would have done the same for me. So
Okay.
I just happened to be there.
I just happened to be there. And so I say, oh, come on, you are just being modest, right? Say yes. Okay. So in order to project modesty, we'll say, okay, look, I just happened to be there. And I was just helping, right? Right.
Right.
Okay.
I'm going to be totally honest. I would do it because I wouldn't want people to be expecting that kind of heroism in the future.
Okay. All right. So maybe next time I may not be so nice, right? So again, speaking about context and speaking about, the nature of all of us, right? At the end of the day, we're just people, ordinary people, just happen to be somewhere where we are called upon, and the instinct just says, do it. And you just went ahead and did it. Now somebody wants to heap praises on you for doing it. I say, oh no. Or, well, don't expect that next. I'm not always like that, It just depends on the situation, right? Anyway, this is supposed to be fun, but we are supposed to learn something from it. Question number 2. If you made it big, would you go to your high school reunion just to show off? Okay? All right. That way, I hear a yes.
No, but it's not a very.
I hear a yes.
Maybe.
I hear a yes. Yeah, why not? I hear you. Why not? Look at me.
Because
Yes,
everybody I went to high school with is dead.
Sir?
Because everybody I went to high school with is dead.
Okay, well, that's you make you remember how blessed you are, right? Okay. So yeah, I had an opportunity to do one of these, you know. These teachers of mine were so old now, you know, some of them didn't even recognize me. And I have to say, give them that honor of having had a chance to be a part of my life. Okay, question number 3. You suspect that someone you highly regard is spreading an ugly rumor about you. And in retaliation, you start one of your own about the person. Now, months later, you find out your suspicion about this significant other are wrong. Do you apologize and admit your own indiscretion or not? Why or why not? Okay?
Yeah.
That's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah,
Like,
I did.
Yes, sir.
I was.
I know that they would have saying that I would not apologize, but I'll tell you.
it's hard.
Okay. That's the knee-jerk reaction, right? Oh no, not me, right? Or
Well, I would want to be the first one to apologize if there was any risk that the other person might apologize also.
okay, that's expecting that. Well, it's the other person's fault too. If he made me do it, right? If he didn't say this, I wouldn't have said that. You know how it goes, right? Yes, ma'am.
I would run around and retract what I had said to everyone I had said it to before I apologized.
Okay. Well, all right. You call it back. You know, the reason that was there is because to call our attention to the fact that words are powerful. And they are kind of like feathers. Once they are in the wind, it's very difficult to catch them back. And when you say words, you need to be very careful about the words you say, right? So I'm finding that trying to be humble is almost a lifetime kind of work. Of course, I won't steal Dr. Shakira's thunder. She's coming in just a few minutes to tell us a little bit more about these kind of things. Okay, when you daydream about your tombstone, what should it read? Should it read rest in peace? Or love by all? Or how will the world ever go on without me? How should it read? Or haven't you thought about it? I have thought about 6 words, and I'm not telling. Okay?
I don't know. For me, what if you don't want your tombstone to say anything?
All right, well.
I guess I don't really think about dying in tombstones or whatever, but.
All right.
But I guess, in my mind, I always think funerals are expensive, so go the cheapest route you can go. Just put me in a pine box and like.
Okay. Oh, you want a pine box?
I'm just something.
See, he was very specific about the kind of box he wants to be buried in.
Hey, listen, caskets are expensive.
Man, oh man.
Gold inlaid and special lining. Like, no, I'm good.
Okay.
You can't ever get that.
I
Yes,
can
sir.
tell you, it's specified in my will. My ashes are going in the Mississippi River on Mardi Gras Day with the crew of St. Anne.
Okay.
Wow.
All right. He got it all figured out, you know. Specific instructions. is to not just that one day we'll have to answer the call. And when that call is made, you just have to answer. And when you do answer, it's helpful if you leave specific instruction for people to follow, right?
I'm gonna leave a video.
Okay, I won't belabor that point. We got it. Number 5, you overhear your significant other say, "You're the best person he or she ever heard." Do you say to yourself, "Right, sure am," or he or she is just saying that because we are dating and he or she has to? Or would you say, "It's so sweet of him or her to say that. We're pretty good together, you know."
You say the first one first and then say the second one?
Okay.
And do you have to say it to yourself?
Yeah, okay, so he's at that point now, right? The first one says, "Right, I sure am."
Yep.
And the last one says, "It's so sweet of him or her to say
That's
that.
funny.
We look so pretty good together."
I think the first one you say to yourself, and the last one you say in public.
Okay, all right. You could make any of those choices or both of them. You're saying it depends. It's always a good answer in bioethics when you say, "Well, what do you think about this?" I say, "Well, it kind of depends." Right? It depends on what. They say it depends on whether you're saying it to yourself or you're saying it to another person. Okay, there are always options, right? Okay, got the message across. Number 6, do you think your obituary should be a full page article with a picture in it? Yes or no? Okay, I no, yes.
Yes.
I for one, if I read my obituary.
They say money on the casket. They give me a full
Somebody is ready. Yeah. You want a half page or a full page? Oh, she prefers a little one. Okay.
I mean,
Oh, you have a whole book.
yeah, book, but it's more than one page.
All right.
You got a pamphlet.
I do.
All right. Wonderful. We got a good laugh out of that. If you haven't thought about it, you should think about it. These are very important things. Number 7, do you believe you are as good in anything and with anybody as you can be?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yes.
So there is always, the message of this is there is always room for improvement, right? Every one of us is like work in progress. At least that's how I see myself. So I might end up being a lifelong student or learner, always trying to learn something, not ignoring what is going on around me, and trying to be part of the solution, not contribute to the problem. Do you have framed pictures of yourself alone with no one else in the photo displayed in your house?
What if it's not your choice, Dr. Soka?
What if it's not your choice? You have to choose to put it up, right?
Listen, I don't make any decisions in my house.
Okay, it's just one of those ways we sort of pat ourselves on the shoulder. You know. Okay. Would you hire someone smarter than you?
Yes.
Yes or no? Oh my goodness, I see a bunch of yeses here. Some leaders are actually very, very afraid and feel threatened by anyone that appears to be smarter than them. Okay, last one. Do you ask what your country can do for you rather than what you can do for your country, I suppose we have to be, you know. Do you?
No.
Yeah, you know who said that, right? Okay.
The other way.
Yeah, it could be the other way. What's the other way, sir?
JFK famously said in his inaugural address, ask not what your country can do, ask what you can do for your country.
Yes.
And for those of us who lived through the Vietnam War, we kind of said, that ain't the whole story.
Okay. So, so obviously, yeah, so with that kind of statement, you wonder what else is underneath that. You see, I'm more inclined to probe statements like that. So responding to this kind of thing goes back to the statement that we made, like an operating statement. Look, any responses you make into issues in this life has to depend on where you sit. Now, do you want to remain where you sit, even though things are changing around you? Or do you want to study whatever is going on around you and see if there are possibilities for movement? Just a thought. Okay, before I bring, did you enjoy that? Okay, it was supposed to be a humorous humility test. I gave you the URL there, so if you want to go look at it, I modified it a little bit. Did you have a question? Yes, sir.
You'll give us the answers.
That's the answer. You gave me all the answers. You gave me all the answers. There are no right or wrong answers to these things. It was meant to provoke your thinking and to see where you are regarding some of these issues. You may not have thought about some of them. I told you, I already know what's going to be on my gravestone. Okay. 9 words. That's it. And I'm not telling. I know you want to hear, but I'm not telling. So, okay. Please, before we move into the afternoon session, please help us start trying to complete the evaluation form. When you hand over, when you have completed it at the end of the day, when we finish and you give the completed evaluation to Ms. Stop, she will give you a copy of that book that we promised you. You know, The Power of Ideals. So there are some ideals in this humorous humility test, are there not? Yes? Did you learn something from it or not? Okay. So please help us to complete that. So to get the book, help us to honestly fill out, because we always want to know what can we do better next time. Want to give a shout out to our videographer. We're going to get connected with the folks out there now, or where are we already connected?
We can. For those of you who are back with us, it looks like we still have a good number online. Just know that when they open up the questions for you to answer, they'll start in here and then allow you online. We now have it where you can use your microphone if you would prefer instead of the chat function. We'll just prompt you as to when that is, and you are welcome to use your microphone, and we'll be able to hear you in the room.
Okay, very well. And Dr. Chaplin is going to come at the last 20 minutes to try to figure out from us what it is, what list of topics you wish to be discussed in future bioethics forums like this. So please keep that in mind and be making a note somewhere so that you can shout it out when he comes here. Dr. Shakir, let me invite you to the podium. Dr. Shakir is our consultant in this area. I don't know much about this area, but that's where she expertise in. So I invited her in to come and help us get through this part of it. We've been working together for a few years now, right? Since 2005. Okay, so, all right, so you know how far we have gone by. Dr. Shakir.
Thank you, Dr. Shodeke. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and it's really a pleasure to be here with you all as well. Let me try it again. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, the title of this presentation, what I want to really talk about with you all is, how do we begin to organize ourselves, our thinking, our actions around healing the wounds. You know that there's a history, there's literature that's replete with unethical research. And despite the fact that ethics has become a very important part of healthcare and biomedical research, sometimes we're still found short. We're falling short in many instances. So what I want to present to you has a lot to do with transformative learning, which is what I studied for my PhD degree, is transformative studies. So I want to start off by just giving you a little overview of the presentation. I want to share my assumptions with you, a little bit about transformation as a learning theory. Self-awareness as being an important aspect to transformation, mental models, a methodology of dialogue, the cultural competence continuum, and humility in cross-cultural research. So I offer these assumptions in the spirit of being transparent. Often when we do research, we're expected to surface our assumptions, right? What it is that we are hoping to understand. In qualitative research, we're also asked to share something about ourselves. Because again, as our opening quote about where you sit, having a lot to do with your insights, having a lot to do with your presuppositions, having a lot to do with the positions that you take. And so if we're open and transparent about that, it makes the playing field a little bit easier. It doesn't totally mitigate, but it does help to make it a little bit easier. So my first assumption is that an emphasis on biological determinants, while inadvertently and structurally marginalizing culture and the social determinants of health, not only opens old, but creates new wounds of humiliation in research partnerships. With careful attention to cultural diversity, openness and mindfulness, and evolving humility in research partnerships is possible. Greater humility in research partnerships can be achieved with rigor, using an historical analysis, human inquiry, critical self-reflection, and a conscious willingness to change. Transformation is not likely as a result of this workshop alone. However, through the application of the Tuskegee Integrated Bioethics Model, greater awareness, sensibilities, and shifts in perspective can occur. Now, in this particular workshop, we didn't really talk that much about the Tuskegee Integrated Model, although I think we did address it in the first one. So I just want to remind everybody that the integrated model is a model that seeks to bring together all of the different aspects, all the different fields, all the different ways in which we can try to understand a particular situation. So we don't look at it purely through one lens. Yes, Dr. Shodeki?
I will have a schematic of that when we do the ethical analysis.
Okay, very good. All right. Let's see, anything else there? I just want to underscore the importance of the rigor, because it sometimes can be a very unsettling and very uncomfortable situation to be in when we are asked to examine our assumptions. And so, it's almost the recognition that it's a bitter pill, that it's something that we need to take and that we need to swallow. And that at the end of that comes greater unity, greater harmony, a greater sense of understanding about what the problem is and hopefully ways to address it. So here's a quote, actually, from the book that Dr. Shodeki talked about, moral ideals, that philosophers have pointed out its inherently paradoxical nature, that is humility. It's a virtue that is constantly in danger of subverting itself. So even with the humorous test, that was humorous, but in reality, it has some very important ideas there. That on the one hand, we seek to be courageous, but then on the other hand, most people tend to play it safe. Most people avoid taking risk, and most people won't really act until they think or believe that the one or the two or the three lone people that are taking the risk are going to win. And that's when you'll see more of a mass of people getting involved. And so you can look at almost any of the virtues that we consider to be aspects of humility, and you can find the flip side of that coin. And we tend to move back and forth between those different dynamics. It's paradoxical because it's often contradictory, but it is also true. Humility is one of the most familiar and widely esteemed of human virtues. To be sure, though, it has not been equally valued in all times and places. It often gets a surprisingly chilly reception in many quarters of modern life, where the so-called mighty god of self-esteem has been elevated to power and permitted to reign unchallenged, and where modesty or reticence are frequently taken to be nothing more than a dissembling bourgeois pose or a sign of weak character. Yet, humility has not disappeared from the scene. Whether as a lofty ideal or as an everyday fact, it remains too deeply embedded in our cultural soil for that. I couldn't help but think a little bit about the difference, between the style of President Obama and the style of President Trump. I'll say no more. So what is transformative learning? Transformation has been around forever, since the beginning of time. And even in the ancient times, there were symbols of transformation, like the dung beetle, for example, or the butterfly. During the seasonal changes, we see transformation, right? And I think that's why we enjoy the seasonal changes, because we can see and feel and sense that something is happening. And while we see it in nature, sometimes we don't recognize it in ourselves. This is a picture of Jacques Mezereau, who is considered the father of modern day transformation. He taught for many years at Columbia University, and he's credited with being the father of transformation. It is defined as the development of revised assumptions, premises, ways of interpreting experience, or perspectives on the world by means of critical self-reflection. So critical self-reflection is being given a lot more recognition and credence in the literature I have found. Let's say a little bit more about what it actually is and how you can use critical reflection as a trigger for transformative learning. So the emphasis is placed on making meaning. Making meaning means to make a sense of an experience. We make an interpretation of it. When we subsequently use this interpretation to guide decision-making or action, then making meaning becomes learning. We learn differently when we are learning to perform than we are learning to understand what is being communicated to us. When we learn to do things, actually that's been in learning theory, that's been identified as instrumental learning. And we say that transformative learning, if you look at maybe the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's, at the top of the pentacle, you have the self-actualization. In some parts of the literature, they refer to it as emancipatory learning or liberatory learning, but it's considered the highest form of learning. Reflection enables us to correct distortions in our beliefs and errors in our problem solving. And that's the reason why it can be so unsettling for people. Because if you've lived your whole life believing in a particular type of way, and suddenly you're getting new information and new knowledge, it can be very disorienting for some people. Critical reflection involves a critique of the presuppositions on which our beliefs have been built. Learning may be defined as the process of making a new or revised interpretation of the meaning of an experience which guides subsequent understanding, appreciation, and action. What we perceive and fail to perceive, and what we think and fail to think, are powerfully influenced by habits of expectation that constitute our frame of reference. That is a set of assumptions that structure the way we interpret our experiences. So whether we pay attention to it or not, or realize it or not, each one of us have a kind of a worldview that is not always articulated, is not always surfaced. And what we're suggesting is that we all really need to think about that, because it certainly informs how we see things. It is not possible to understand the nature of adult learning or education without taking into account the cardinal role played by these habits in making meaning. So a lot of times when we ask the question to people, where is the starting point for transformation? If I ask that question before I put the slide up there, we wouldn't always get this response. So assessing our own attitudes is the starting place for opening up new possibilities and becoming simply more aware of where we stand and who we are. So we want to ask ourselves, am I open to an ongoing conversation among all partnership participants and our broader community about what the partnership is trying to accomplish? So I want to just ask you a question. Think about, like, what would being open to an ongoing conversation, what would it look like? And what would be required of you as an individual to help with that? And how could we operationalize it? So if anybody wants to respond, you could respond to any one of those three questions. How would you operationalize it? What does it look like to be open to having these rigorous, possibly risky conversations that might involve rattling the cages of a few people, or even yourself, becoming vulnerable. Anybody care to respond? I see the brain computers working.
I think it's important that
Get the mic.
In that context, I think it's very important to not be wedded to a particular position that we may hold. Be willing to give that up and see it as changing in terms of other perspectives and how that might be met.
Yeah.
And I think looking at how we can keep what we consider to be the essential elements of our own position while giving up the position as right in and of itself is the challenge.
Yes, and that's very, right on, because often we invite people to temporarily suspend their preconceived positions or notions, because it's not about a debate, where we see a lot of winner takes all, and that people fight to win. Yes.
I think in the key word in your statement is partnership participants, because as I was thinking about this, I'm thinking, I wouldn't be open to an ongoing conversation with David Duke, for example, because I don't consider him a partnership participant with me. So what you're saying is there's a certain basis of agreement pre-existing among the individuals in this conversation that allows them at least enough common ground to begin with. Even though they might be pretty far apart, they still share certain pertinent assumptions that allow conversation, dialogue to proceed.
Yes, I think that could be true. However, we had a dialogue, a group of us in Tuskegee, because we have a Confederate statue in the middle of our town square. And during the time period when all around the country that was being raised and there was a lot of protest about it, there's really kind of like a silence around it. So we had a group called the Black Belt Deliberative Dialogue Group that hosted a series of dialogues on the topic, and came in some, David Duke types. And it was a very revealing dialogue. I mean, I even learned some things from their perspective, how passionate they felt about their history. I didn't agree with it, but at least I was kind of better able to kind of grasp where they were coming from. And I hope that they were able to hear some of the things that the other people were talking about. But I think that in the context of what we're doing here, I would say yes, that your participants are the people who are working together to try to understand how to use the genome and genetic research to enhance and to make healthcare more effective. So in that sense, I'd say yes. Any other comments? Any from the audience there? Yes. Does anyone listening online want to comment on the question? Okay, we'll move on.
I guess I just want to bring up the
Yes.
point of, if you don't know whether someone who you hope will be a partner is ready for partnership, or what level of uncertainty about the partnership they bring, that makes it a more complicated first move, it seems like to me. And in some ways, if you assume that there are major barriers to their participation, that adds a layer of, it almost creates a barrier.
Right.
But if you don't somehow acknowledge the potential for there to be reservations about the partnership, then you also have barriers. So how do you balance those two?
Yeah, again, that's the paradox involved. And I think that, others may have ideas too, but I think that that's kind of where you begin with just an open question, and you might just spend that first time together talking about that, just posing the question, more or less like, where are you with this? And do a lot of real good listening. Anyone else have a point to add to the question here about not knowing where the partners might stand, and rather than making assumptions, we'd really want to try to find out, right? Yeah, and sometimes there's a lot of work that can be done even before you call the first meeting. So, the sort of the idea of the lobbyist type, you send somebody that you think has the skills maybe to talk to this person, or somebody that already has a bit of a friendship or relationship with the person, in order to kind of generally find out where they might stand, so that then you can move from there. Yes,
Yeah,
Jason.
I guess it kind of goes to what you were saying in that, and touching on a little bit of what everybody said thus far, is I guess in respect to kind of where we are politically now, right? The idea of common ground becomes a little bit fuzzier, right? So it becomes an issue of where not just I might understand where you stand, right? But where you stand makes to me makes absolutely no sense. Like it seems to be we can't agree on what a fact is, or where we, like, what's real. Like we it's like you say, like we were talking about yesterday. It's like we're living in parallel universes. We're experiencing the same environmental external stimuli, but for whatever reason your take is completely different. And so I guess in context of where we are now, understanding if we want to be in a partnership, we understand we're going to have to meet each other at some point, right? There's going to be some form of compromise. But when we start extending what we're doing outside of our current partnership into the community, into other spheres of influence and understanding, how do you then bridge that? Like, how do you get past that entrenchment of, I'm over here and you're over there, and it's almost like the something like old Western, like feuding families or something crazy, where we just can't see eye to eye. So how do you
I think just as we're
that?
going through this type of exercise, I think we have to do that with other people as well, to get the wheels turning. They may not make a major, complete, 360-degree shift, but I do believe people shift incrementally and over time, and that what it forces us to do is to, to continue to nudge and push the envelope, but at the same time, it develops our sense of, patience, and our sense of compassion and humility at the same time, when we're being triggered by people who speak a different language, so to speak, than what we do. Yes.
So in thinking about the comment up there, I'd sort of break it into two components.
Okay.
One is, in any group, whatever it is, what is the group trying to accomplish? Those are the goals.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it's easier in broad brushstrokes to understand where you would like to end up. Where the work is how to get there, because there are many different pathways, because to the point that was made earlier today, your perspective may depend on where you're sitting. Mm-hmm. The pathway to the agreed upon goal, at least the broadly agreed upon goal, will probably depend on where you're starting from. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes that conversation, at least in my perspective, the most important thing is to have that discussion about how you're going to get to that agreed upon place. Mm-hmm. Now, to your point, Jason, sort of in our current context, there seems to be not so much agreement on where we want to go. Different conversation. But at least as I read that statement, I tend to, as you implied, there may be, in the context especially of this group and today, there may be some broad agreement about where we'd like to end up. Mm-hmm. It's just, how do we get there, and what are the elements that we need to look at and work on in order that we can converge on that point.
Okay. Being careful all along that you're not just coalescing the same people who think exactly the same, because I think that that's really what we're trying to get at, is when we begin to work with people who are different from us, the other person, right? What does that mean? What does that do? How does that change the conversation? And is there something in what they might say that turns on a light bulb for us? Yes.
I agree absolutely with what you've just said, but I want to go back to what is it Jason had said. And I think there's a real continuing point that you've made that remains problematic, and that is we really don't have agreement on what the facts are that we should be working toward. If you ask some people, Obamacare was a terrible, imploding sort of program. You ask millions of other people, and it provided health insurance to people who couldn't afford it otherwise. We don't even have agreement about whether it's imploding or is significant progress forward in our attempt to ensure and provide health care for the population. And those drastic sort of disagreements about our shared lived experience of the same phenomenon really, I think, keeps us from setting goals, because we can't agree about what it is we need to fix and what would constitute a fix, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's a complex situation. Okay, I see a couple of hands. Want to go here? Okay.
We'll just note in the public health arena, look at the controversy between vaccine advocates and anti-vaccine folk. It's your fundamental assumptions are seemingly incompatible, and so when we talk about a partnership, I don't. Sorry, but I don't see much partnership when it comes down to trying to translate that into public policy that is good on the one hand and respective of the rights of the individual on the one hand versus the protection obligation to the protection and better health of the community. So,
okay.
I sort of see in the context of the kind of research we're talking about that there can be differentials in power and all sorts of other things among the participants where, I'm the PI, I have a clear vision of we want to do. Mm-hmm. Any reasonable person must have the same vision. And so it's pretty easy for the conversation to go along without it being clear that there are other views of how it ought to go, and how you sort of neutralize the power differentials and the things that make people suppress what they really feel in their heart and want to say to get it out in the discussion is a challenge that many of us need a lot of help developing skill in.
Yeah, and I think some of the slides to come, we'll talk a little bit more about the points that you've raised. All right, so again, the self-awareness is the starting point for all of us. Understanding where your culture kind of begins and where it ends and where it overlaps with the next person's. Because we tend to think that the way that we were raised or our beliefs, oftentimes we think that they're kind of universal. And when we see people doing something that's very, very different from the way we do things, we tend to be sort of judgmental about it, or they talk about othering people. So the self-assessment is really important, and also to be aware of your own triggers, your own hot buttons. So when you think about the people that might come to the table who have a completely different perspective, the whole process becomes transformative, not only for them, but also for you. Because the reality is that we do live in a world that's pretty divided, and so how do we try to function within that environment? So mental models is another point of awareness. And according to Peter Singh, mental models are conceptual frameworks consisting of generalizations and assumptions from which we understand the world and take action in it. We may not even know that these mental models exist or are affecting us. So this kind of goes back to the self-awareness. That if we had the other people in the room who completely would disagree with what you're doing, and we talk to them about the existence of these mental models and being more self-aware, maybe we might get 2 or 3 of them to buy into it. The others will continue to sit with it maybe over a time period. And you never know at some point when they have a bit of an epiphany. So these are beliefs, ideas, images even, verbal descriptions that we consciously or unconsciously form from our experiences, in which, when formed, guide our thoughts and actions with narrow channels. These representations of perceived reality explain cause and effect to us and lead us to expect certain results, and also to give meaning to events and predispose us to behave in certain ways. Although mental models provide internal stability in a world of continuous change, they also blind us to facts and ideas that challenge or defy our deeply held beliefs. They are, by their very nature, fuzzy and incomplete, and everyone has different models, as you all have been discussing, that differ in detail from everyone else's of the same concept or subject, no matter how common or simple. So we just have to, not get frustrated by that. It does feel overwhelming. But I think it brings some satisfaction just to know that you have made the effort. You've made the effort to try to bring people together, and not to assume that they are the problem. Yeah, because we ourselves, in some ways, as righteous as we want to think about what we're doing, are also carrying a mental model from where we stand. So being aware of self, being aware of these mental models are the things that we're saying that have to be done in order to get partners to the table, to try to create something that's inclusive and also takes into consideration how these participants, or, in biomedicine, we refer to them as subjects, what knowledge they bring to bear. So we see dialogue as another important intervention, a very important modality. It is designed to create a setting where conscious, collective mindfulness can be maintained. And that's a quote from physicist David Bohm. Have any of you heard of him? It's a pretty well-known physicist who did a lot of work with Einstein, trying to begin to understand the ways in which dialogue can be used. So David Bohm, B-O-H-M, and Donald Factor and Peter Garrett, they use this word as a way of exploring the roots of the many crises that face humanity today. It enables inquiry into an understanding of the sorts of processes that fragment and interfere with real communication between individuals, nations, and even different parts of the same organization. In our modern culture, men and women are able to interact with one another in ways that they can sing together, we can dance together, we can play together with little difficulty, but their ability to talk together about subjects that matter deeply to them seems invariable to lead to dispute, division, and sometimes, like major fallout. So it can cause violence, in fact. But they say that in their view, this condition points to a deep and pervasive defect in the process of human thought. In dialogue, a group of people can explore the individual and collective presuppositions. So if everybody's willing to share their presuppositions, it creates a kind of more of a safe environment for other people to do the same. Their presuppositions about their ideas, beliefs, and feelings that subtly control their interactions. It provides an opportunity to participate in a process that displays communication successes and failures. It can reveal the often puzzling patterns of incoherence that lead the group to avoid certain issues, or, on the other hand, to insist against all reason on standing and defending opinions about particular issues. Dialogue is a way of observing collectively how hidden values and intentions can control our behavior, and how unnoticed cultural differences can clash without our realizing what is occurring. It can therefore be seen as an arena in which collective learning takes place, and out of which a sense of increased harmony, fellowship, and creativity can arise. There's more, being written about the role of science as being more of a creative process, because the nature of dialogue is exploratory. Its meaning and its methods continue to unfold. There are no firm rules. They can't be laid down for conducting a dialogue because its essence is learning, not as the result of consuming a body of information or doctrine imparted by an authority, nor as a means of explaining or criticizing a particular theory or program, but rather as a part of an unfolding process of creative participation between peers. And what we often do is, when we gather the group together, the first thing we do is to get the group to talk about some type of agreements. There's a little book called The Four Agreements, and then the author came out with a fifth agreement, written by Miguel Ruiz. He happened to be of Mexican orientation, Mexican American. And the four agreements was to be impeccable with your words, to take nothing for granted, to do your best, to take nothing personally, and to make no assumptions. Those were the four agreements. And then he came out with a book of the fifth agreement. And I think one of the people that was here earlier spoke to it about to listen, but to be skeptical. Just to be skeptical, not to attack, and not to say that your skepticism is a reason to disagree, but just to be skeptical. So, these are some agreements, but in your group, you don't impose these agreements. You have a nice, rich conversation with people about what they want. Okay, when you come in, you have some goals, okay, the things that you want to be outcomes from this dialogue. But then you say, okay, what do we need to put in place to feel comfortable? Because we want people to open up. And so people will begin to say certain things, and you kind of make a list, and often there'll be things like to be respectful. If you say be respectful, then you can have a conversation about what respect looks like, because it can mean different things for different people, right? Oftentimes people will say that, that there's confidentiality here, the saying about what goes on in Vegas, right? Stays in Vegas. Because if you're working with colleagues, if you want them to open up, you don't want to think that somebody goes back to wherever and says something that somebody might have shared out of a sense of vulnerability, And there are other things that people will say about the agreements. And then from there, you can at least begin to have a conversation that feels a little bit more real. And then if you all take that risk and be vulnerable and share what's really in your heart and in your mind, people come along. That's one of the things that we have learned as a result of the work. This is another tool that can be used. And I'm not going to talk about every one in detail, but you can find it online. And it was developed by a social worker, Terry Cross. And it's very useful in helping an organization to look at issues around how they value diversity. It helps them to conduct an assessment of their organization and also of themselves. And it speaks to helping people to manage the dynamics of difference. And this too ties into the whole self-awareness process. It's really designed for a system though, so it actually allows the system to kind of gauge where they're at. So on one end of the continuum, you have cultural destructiveness. Can anybody give me an example of what cultural destructiveness might look like in the context of what you all are doing with the genetics, with the research?
13% cut in the NIH budget.
Okay.
Cuts the research structure, right? Destroying the research environment.
Okay, very good. Anything else? Yes.
There's an example in Arizona that have a SUPOT chart where the genomic research that is done both threatens some of, or stigmatize that community, as well as threaten some of the deeply held cultural beliefs.
That's right. Yeah, and we're going to look at that shortly. Yeah, very good. So, in some other areas, I guess more in the social sciences realm, the idea of like genocidal practices, ethnic cleansing, those kinds of things would be considered cultural destruction, right? But even in our institutions, sometimes you can see kind of a cultural destructive tendency around certain issues. I see somebody nodding their head. Do you care to speak on it? Okay. Play it safe. Okay. So on that end, and then on the other end, cultural proficiency. So this is not to suggest that anybody ever achieves true, total, 100% cultural competence, but it does give you a sense of awareness, at least a comfort level where, if you don't know anything about a person's culture, at least you feel safe enough to ask, or you can decide that you're going to go visit a museum, or you're going to read a book or something like that. The one in the middle, the cultural blindness, is the one I think that most people kind of confuse, because we think of cultural blindness as the place where we want to be. But in point of fact, what's being said is that we don't want to be blind to culture. We want to actually acknowledge culture. We want to know more about cultures, and we want to celebrate cultures, because all of the cultures have played a role in bringing something into, the greater civilization. Okay, so humility in cross-cultural research. There we have the head, which I'm equating with our theories or our worldviews, and the way that we think and construct. What I'm suggesting as theories that are helpful for dealing with bringing humility into the research partnerships would be some of the social science theories, like critical theory, appreciative inquiry, and of course, the participatory paradigm. So are you all familiar with these? Okay, I'll just comment briefly. Critical theory allows us, with the power dynamics, it really allows us to debunk all of the isms, whether it's racism, sexism, class, the religious issues that take place, same-sex relationships, all of the isms. When we say, okay, let's do a critical inquiry, or let's have a critical look, we ask ourselves, where do these ideas come from? Paternalism, yes. Yeah, that's a part of the sexism question. And so it's been said that if you are a man, you have a strong tendency towards, the power issue and the sexism. It doesn't mean all men, but it says that you have a tendency, that if you're a man, you tend to be sexist. And we've seen that changing, with the women's movement, that if you're white, you're going to be prone to be racist, unless you've done the work not to be. I've met some profoundly anti-racist white people that I came to know, who I actually learned a lot from about my own history, because they had been involved in various movements at a very, very profound level. Yes.
I think it also can tie into the resentment that we see increasingly in the country of experts, quote unquote. There was a really good article on the New York Times editorial page yesterday about the end of the expert in the United States, and going back to the vaccine controversy. You know, I'm going to believe Jenny McCarthy, because I think she knows more than any of the physicians in this room about the transmission of infectious disease and autism. So, you know, I think paternalism exists on the level of also, I know more than you do, and therefore you ought to take it and be grateful for what I'm about to endow you with.
Okay. So for me, that was a great interaction, because I took your comment to mean to tie it into the sexism, but he just illuminated my thinking. And so thank you for that. Yes, Dr. Shudeke.
And even sometimes the so-called beneficent approaches or beneficent goodness can be quite hurtful to the recipient of such acts.
Yeah.
Unknowingly, to
unknowingly.
whomever is doing the goodness in their mind.
Yeah. And so how you bring that to that person's attention without, you know, completely destroying them becomes the challenge. You know, how do we point out these things to each other? You know, we have to develop relationships with people. I mean, there's no simple way out of it, you know. So, you know, the critical theory allows us to debunk all of the isms and to have a conversation about it, because all of us have been the products of our educational system. And all of us have lived in a world where these isms have been persistent over many, many hundreds and hundreds of years. So we're all affected by it. And that's the reason why we say, you know, that if you're a male, you tend to be sexist. If you're straight, you tend to be homophobic, right? And so on and so forth. So the heart, you know, and as you know, the theories feed into your methodology, right? So if we have a theory that's based in participatory paradigm, then our methodology has to become participatory. And I think it's really hard for biomedical science to figure out how to do that, you know. But I think that that's part of the creative part that we can discuss and brainstorm. No doubt somebody will have a good idea. Several people will have good ideas of how we can be more participatory, genuinely, as a methodology. And then we've talked about the dialogue as a methodology. We talked about the things that we need to do for our own personal transformation. Because don't we all admire those exemplary people that Dr. Shudeke showed us on the screen, those 6 people, you know? So in some ways, we all kind of yearn to have more humility. I mean, that Mandela was in prison for 27 years and actually ended up winning the admiration of his cagers, you know. And I think that we have that propensity and that ability to affect people in that way, just by walking the walk and to just be. It's not easy though. And then of course the hands is our commitment to action. And we're asking ourselves, what can and what should we do? You know, it's not enough to just have these nice, fuzzy conversations. It has to translate into some kind of action. So there's a lot of literature also on decolonizing research. And I'll make a promise to send you all some references on that. But it's mostly literature that's coming out of the rest of the world and African Americans are not considered to be a colonized people, but yet African Americans have some of the same concerns and some of the same issues that colonized people. So you'll see a lot of literature written out of the scholars that are Native American in Australia and Africa, Latin America, talking about the importance to decolonize research. So as I close, I want to ask that question. What does that mean to you? If we decolonize research, what are some thoughts about what that would include or what it would look like? Okay, can anybody answer that question for Jason? To decolonize research, what do you think that means?
Are you implying, or does the term imply involving in research those people who are either less powerful or more vulnerable?
Yes, that could be part of it. It could also, someone commented on the paternalism and the beneficence, that we come in and we think that we know the best, we know the right way to do things, which is how when people went into these places, Africa, Asia, they imposed their way of thinking on the people, right, over hundreds and hundreds of years. Yes,
yeah,
sir.
it seems like it must include sharing control.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, anthropologists went into these parts of the world and found these cultures to be so exotic, and they took pictures and they made lots and lots of money off of these beautiful books, and the people didn't get anything from it. So that becomes a question too, about this research, that, scholars get to publish, you guys get to write books, and you get promotions, maybe. I don't want to assume. And often the so-called subjects or the participants get nothing. And so it raises issues of authorship and how you share that. Yes, in the back.
Would the HeLa cell
Yes,
be a case study of that sort of colonization mentality?
exactly. And so it brings into question the whole issue of worldview. So again, we go back to that first quote in the beginning about where you sit. And so where you sit a lot of times has to do with what you believe, how you perceive the world to be. And we're going to see in this film that we're going to watch with the Havapusai that many indigenous people believe strongly that even after death, that their blood, that their cells are valuable and carry spirit. And so it's, that the worldview has a lot to do that, that we as researchers have to realize that, and the importance of the worldview of our participants. Yes.
In terms of how do we decolonize research, it seems like I'm thinking of the effort to make our scientific workforce more diverse is a part of that.
Yeah, it would be a part of that, but we also can't assume that just because they are diverse, that they even share the same, the perspective, because we've all been affected. As I was talking about, how we're all conditioned by our education process. So like in the case of the syphilis study, we had, Black doctors that were going along with the study, even after it had been pointed out that it was what was really going on. They voted to continue. And, it's very complicated, like the nurse Rivers, the role that she played. But there were also these 15 Black physicians who went along with it. So we're all in need and have been miseducated to a certain extent. Dr. Shadeki?
So part of that could possibly be that here we are wanting to be heavily involved in genetic and genomic research. And we have good intentions to involve and include all people, so to speak. If we do our work well, we just might get to a point where we see more and more of them being convinced of the reason for them to participate, but then there will be some that will say absolutely not. So just because we think it's a good idea is where I'm going with it, does not mean that some people will think that it's really a good idea or a good thing for them to be involved in. And we should be ready for that.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty complex, but we've got to tackle it, At least I think we do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's watch Blood Journey.
There are no cars in Supai, a village of 600 located on the floor of the Grand Canyon. It is only accessible by horse, helicopter, or on foot. Today, the helicopters land regularly with supplies or visitors, but for years the trails were the way of life for the Havasupai Indians.
We were hunters and farmers, but today we hardly use these trails because of the sickness that we have, and this sickness is called sugar diabetes.
So in the early 1990s, when researchers from Arizona State University came to Supai, offering to conduct diabetes research, many tribe members were eager to participate.
I gave my blood. I gave my blood. They took my mom and my dad. And I was 19 years old when they took my blood.
Blood has deep spiritual meaning to the Havasupai.
Many people obtained degrees, and what did we get? Nothing.
Carletta Toulouse was one of the very few members of her tribe to attend college. In 2003, while a student attending a dissertation reading, she was shocked to discover that her tribal blood samples had been the basis for studies beyond diabetes research.
All sorts of studies that were harmful to our reputation.
Researchers had looked at their blood for possible genetic markers for schizophrenia and had studied patterns of inbreeding. An anthropological study traced the tribe's ancestral migration from Asia, which contradicted their religious beliefs that they'd originated in the canyon.
A strange person whom I never saw before taking a part of our bodies, and he finds out that we came from elsewhere. It hurts.
Blood vials sat in this freezer during a 7-year legal battle with the university until Tuesday, when the Arizona State Budget Committee approved a cash payment to the tribe in the return of any remaining blood.
We could do some kind of big ceremony. They deserve their blood back, and they deserve closure.
My heart cries because I know they're out there, and I know they want to come home. My relatives, my friends.
It is an acknowledgement that could have broad implications for genetic researchers.
My main worry is that the research data will be used in ways that directly hurt the research subjects, but it will be used in ways that they don't agree with.
Hank Greeley is the director of the Center for Law and the Biosciences at Stanford University.
But it's not just the Havasupai. It's a situation with thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of us across the country.
Florando Ukwala has held on to our ancestors' way of life.
I make baskets. I climb the rocks. I go down by the river and collect my sticks. See, this is too fresh. It's not the right time yet. Yes, I have diabetes. I have diabetes. My mom had diabetes. My dad had diabetes. My grandpa, my grandma on my dad's side, my great grandma. on my grandma, on my mom's side. I wanted that cure. I wanted that. Where? Why so long?
While it is clear that some tribe members signed a consent form for a study of, quote, behavioral and medical disorders, they say they never understood that their blood would be used to study anything but diabetes.
I understand the scientist's perspective on this, and I share it to some extent. People are desperate to get more data, to get more samples. I think if we want people to give their samples to be used for a very wide range of projects, we should tell them up front. But we shouldn't say we're going to do it to study this disease, paren, and other things, close paren, and then use it for all the other things.
And we fought for many years to obtain the samples back to this village, back to the families, back to the deceased.
Because that's the way of our ancestry, and we honor and respect them no matter what. If it's not their body, it's their blood.
"20 years after they first gave blood, members of the Havasupai tribe have traveled 300 miles to retrieve it. The university is paying them $700,000 and returning their blood.
Okay, if you can help me get the ethical analysis. Okay, there it is. We can. All right. Breathe in with me, if you will, please. One time. Out. In. Out. In. Out. Thank you. So you're familiar with the process that we use in ethical analysis, but this is the schematic diagram of the approach that Dr. Chakia mentioned the other time. It's called Tuskegee University Integrative Bioethics, sort of approach to ethical analysis. In this approach, we really do believe that we value science and its application, so we embrace all the scientific advancement that have been made and yet to be made, and there are possible applications as well. But we believe that those cannot be done in a vacuum. In other words, they all have to be done in a system, an ecosystem, if you will, concerning all of us, including all our animals and plants, and how what we do can actually have a tremendous effect on this ecosystem and make life, rather than making it more easier for us to live in, actually make it very, very difficult. So we live in those systems. So the word systems around is to convey that message. And within that system, we have all those different kinds of, if you will, we say intellectual or knowledge perspectives that will come from the social, from the cultural, economic, legal, political, philosophical, and yet religious. And today, I think that we may have touched on almost all of them, except perhaps, not even except, uh, the legal was even part of the video clip that we just made. Do you know how long it took those 600 or so people fighting the elephant, Arizona State University Board of Regents? Do you know how long it took for them to fight them in court? 10 years. 10 years. And they won. You had the result of it, but does it have to be that way? We're saying it does not have to be that way, but then we have to change our thinking. Again, I say with Albert Einstein, we cannot resolve the present situation with the same kind of mindset that created this situation in the first place. We need to change the paradigm. And you take each one of us, and those of you are neighbors joining us by satellite out there, to speak us as we get ready to sort of analyze the video clip that we just watched, thinking deeply about the facts of the case. This is a schematic diagram that I came up with too after, I would say, some 12, 15 years of looking through all of these and seeing that what exists in the literature might go anywhere from 7 different steps to 11 or 12 steps to ethical analysis. Well, I managed to boil them down to 4, knowing fully well that underneath every one of those things in the squares are sub-steps. So facts of the case would include things like, what is ethically troubling to you about this case? What is the case about? What is it that's troubling to you about it? Another way of stating that is, what's the ethical analysis? What is the ethical issue that actually looms large in this case? So if we confine our thoughts to the last video clip that we just saw, we can analyze it for the facts of the case. We need to distinguish who the stakeholders are. And there are many in this case, including the major characters there. They have a SUPAI and ASU, but then there are others that are not pictured, but yet the consequences of what has just been shared as an experience can be far-reaching. And then, what is it that is possible to do if we in fact decide that it is not ethically appropriate or acceptable to do nothing, although sometimes that's an option, to just watch and wait, right? But if we decide that that's not the case with the Hafasupai case that we just watched, then there are a number of things then that can possibly be done, even as we gear up to continue our genomic studies with our expertise on genetics and all the potential that these offers. What is it that we must keep in mind? How do we get people who, on the face of it, will say, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that? How do we get them to a stage where they'll say, now that you have explained it, I understand it better. Maybe I will consider it. Because you said that, because you are acting this way, because I see you are so transparent about it, you are telling me more than I even wish to know about these things. Now, why did I say that? It is because sometimes ordinary people want to know more than researchers are willing to tell them. Am I alone in this, or do you agree or disagree? Yeah, this is the case. Many assumptions were made for the syphilis studies. No. They won't understand what syphilis is. Just tell them it's bad blood. Well, as it turns out, those folks were poor, but they were not stupid. If you had just told them what it is, maybe we wouldn't be where we are today. You see? All right, so this is if you make a mental model of that, and I won't belabor the point here. So I'll let us dive into it. Oh, while you are watching the video clip, what did you hear? What did you see? How did you feel? So all you our neighbors out there joining us, you are welcome to make your comments. We will hear you here and we will respond accordingly. And then we will raise our comments here, and I know you can hear us over there as well. Who will be first? Yes, sir.
I can respond.
Pick up the microphone. Thank you.
If I could respond on the feel side, I was struck in the final scenario when they were performing the ceremony, retaking the specimens back, as we would call them specimens, they would call them blood of the ancestors back. But what an alien environment in which they were performed, the rituals were being performed, but you got the shots of the coolers and the folks, and everybody was in the protective gear and whatnot. That was just, I thought about it as the antithesis of the environment back in their community in which such a ceremony would have taken place under conditions in which they would have felt in control and, if you will, powerful in the situation.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. I've watched this thing several times, but it didn't occur to me. He's speaking about always having to learn something new. It didn't occur to me, just exactly as you explained it, that those people were in a very strange environment.
And not of their choosing.
Not of their choosing. So before we go with our gizmo to wherever these people are or invite them, know that you are trying to, if you're going to them, you are going to get some eyebrows raised if you go there with a gizmo. And if you're inviting them to come to the clinic or wherever the research is going to be performed, they come into a strange environment. So you might want to educate them first about what is in this environment that they are going to see or have to do, so they won't be shocked when they get there. All right? Other comments? Yes, sir.
So just to answer sort of the questions, actually I felt maybe a culmination of all three. So what I heard was their pain, their sort of
pain.
The pain. I also saw their struggle, and then what I felt was a culmination of that, which then made me, as a basic science and researcher, feel a bit conflicted, maybe uneasy, a point of caution and pause.
Caution and pause.
Of how we move forward.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Yates. This is the kind of responses that An honest look at this video is the kind of responses and feeling it is supposed to evoke in most of us. Pause, think again, ask somebody, share. Okay. Other comments from out there or in here?
This is Sarah Knight. I have a comment.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and
Oh,
clear.
terrific.
Loud
So
and clear.
one of the things that was powerful to me was to see the people in a group and to feel their pain together. And when I think about how we normally provide and go through an informed consent process, and I realize that this is in part because of confidentiality and other ethical considerations in informed consent, we work with individuals. And so it may be, as an individual, a person might consent to something, but if they are in a group and have the chance to be fully educated and informed about research and have a chance to discuss the research within their community where they feel whole and supported, we might get a different response.
Mm-hmm.
And we often do not really plan community meetings to prepare for, certainly in community-based participatory research, we do that much more. But for many types of research, possibly even some community-based participatory research, we still consent people individually. We don't necessarily ask for a community's permission to do research in their community. And I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. Somebody else? Okay. So it means that we will have to prepare ourselves for that. Actually, in many of these reservations now, they have what is called Tribal Research Council. So no one can just fly in by the helicopter and do something and just fly out anymore. Okay, that was stopped. Another thing that's coming down the pipe that perhaps some of you picked out, maybe not, was the fact that no one told them that their blood was going to be used for other things other than studying this disease that they call sugar diabetes for them, right? The thing that is concerning that's coming down the pipe regarding this, and this is in the final common rule. Dr. May, I don't know if you are familiar, is this issue of broad consent. So while that might play well with some people, I doubt it if it will play well with the Harvard Super folks. Broad consent means we're taking your blood and this is what we're interested in using the blood for today. But we want you to sign it off for all other future endeavors that we may want to do with it. Isn't that concerning? That's what's coming out of the federal regulation now. Okay, so the regulation that we were working with since 1991 was recently upgraded and updated. So now we have a new final rule. And one of the things that, according to that, the reasoning goes, And I'm speaking as a bioethicist now, not as an agent of the federal government. That's why I gave you that acknowledgement and disclaimer at the start. That rule is concerning to me. But it is the kind of rule that is supposed to make it easier for researchers to perform. Now, don't get me wrong, there are advantages to doing that, but then there are disadvantages to doing it that way too.
Dr. Shodike, do you
Yes,
think
sir.
that then shifts, creates and or shifts a new level of responsibility to investigators and the informed consent process? Such that maybe there are levels of consent, which is for the specified study and nothing else, or
yes,
that plus a broad consent if appropriately consented. Now, of course, the devil is in what does that mean?
Yeah.
But that raises the bar. Thinking of it from an investigator perspective, to me, that raises the bar for consenting. And consenting is no longer just checking a box. It's a rather lengthy discussion.
Right. Correct. I would have to agree with, some of the points that you made. That, yes, but I mean, in an ideal world, okay, I would like to agree with you, but there's nothing stopping anybody from doing whatever. So while that's one perspective of it, the other perspective is that it's what's going to concern people that are going to be quote unquote need to be consented. That's part of where I'm coming from. I see where, if they want to accept that responsibility now, if researchers want to accept that responsibility, right? We're also on where they're supposed to check which is which, the people being consented. I should be, okay, I want it for only this one research. Or I want to be informed if you are going to use it for something else. Or never do I want it to be used for anything else other than this research. Or if you must use it, you must re-consent me or something like that.
So if I could just tie back to a slide that you showed before, it was the one that was called Components of Humility?
Yes.
The first bullet point was truthfulness.
Yes.
So if we as investigators live up to that, then I would hope we can all be more comfortable
with
those processes. But it does require, it obligates us to think about each one of those points. And can we provide the stewardship to reach that level?
I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Kimberly. If I ask the question, how many of you here does not know that we have an obligation? Everybody will say, yeah, I know. I have an obligation. I have a dog in this fight, right? Just to put it mildly. But if I turn the question around and say, so how many of you are prepared to take responsibility for that obligation? Well, that's a different question, isn't it?
It's walking the walk.
Right. So that's a different question. Do we not know? We do know. But still, it's a struggle to do better, right? Okay. I have some hands up here. Dr. May, then back there.
I personally am skeptical that we'll ever resolve this problem through the informed consent process itself. I mean, I think there are so many complexities in predicting the types of research. And we've, in the past, gone to reconsenting people and then asking them, can we use it for these types of things? And even we cannot envision the types of things adequately that we're going to want to use it for in the future. How could we ever ask a layperson to seriously envision the types of things that it might be used for? I think informed consent, even if we could, there's an additional question about the pressure that they would feel to agree to that if they want to get into the trial or to participate in any research at all. I think what's really going to be required is that we set up gatekeeping mechanisms to the tissue that we bank, to the data that we bank, that allows access to that to researchers only after it passes some sort of community engaged review board, right? That reflects that IRBs were meant to do, but it ends up getting staffed by researchers themselves. But having serious community involvement in this sort of review board for the types of research that we allow that banked tissue or data to be used for, because I don't think informed consent will ever really resolve this. It's just too complex. That's just a personal opinion.
Okay. Let me comment on what you just said, and then you will raise your or give us your input on that. May I? 2 weeks ago, I was with the Association of Black Cardiologists in Atlanta, having one of their training sessions. They asked me to come and comment on the ethical considerations of the Association of Black Cardiologists study, aka cardiovascular disease study, aka registry, cardiovascular disease registry, and, if you will, repository. And one of the major players there said this: they need to do away with institutional review board. They need to do away with all of those review things. What does local IRB or local community review committees, what use are they anyway? I said, oh my God. You know why? Because in this new regulation, there is a push to use a single IRB for multi-site studies. You see that? Now, that has a very serious implications for the sort of comment that you just made as something that could be helpful. Gatekeepers. I say, no, we don't have to have this research. No, you can be from the federal government and you can tell us you've come to help us, but we can say, no, thank you. You can take the research somewhere else. It doesn't have to involve us. There should be some gatekeepers to say to us, check your ego before you get here. Pause, think about what you are trying to do to us to get whatever it is you wish to get. Yes, ma'am, down there.
Yeah, not really bringing, I guess, any answers, but just thinking of the complexity of things on the cancer type of studies, because in cancer, it's common for us to find commercial banks that sell arrays with tissues. I have some in my lab, So, I mean, I have no idea what kind of consent those people signed. And obviously, we're talking about consent more in the health disparities overview, but it affects everyone that gives any biological sample for research. But I was just thinking how, in cancer you have tissues available in so many sources, and then you also have the fact, for example, ovarian cancer is a disease that has a long, it takes a while for a person to die of ovarian cancer, let's say. So the median survival is about 5 years. research that is aiming to look at survival for ovarian cancer, then has to have older samples. And what I'm thinking is, think about samples that were collected consent 10, 15 years ago, where nothing of these discussions were made. Do we not use those samples? I guess it's my point, because it still might benefit the future treatments, but what do you do about those?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me take a few minutes to speak to that. The new rule says all of those tissue as they are now, we're hoping that some of them are de-identified tissues, okay? But there's somebody holding the key to connect the native information to the tissue, if there is a need to do that. Apparently, that is where precision medicine is sort of leading to, right? You'll be able to get those tissues, and you don't necessarily know the identity of but you do the research first, and then you see what other information do you need. And then if it's necessary, then the re-identification can be made. If researches that are already going on using the identified specimen will be grandfathered in. But going forward from next year, January, right, things might get a bit stiffer in that regard. And I haven't read the thing into detail enough to say, here's what's going to happen. But I suspect that this de-identification, re-identification thing, well, we may need to look at a little more closely. Perhaps nothing too bad will happen to a tissue owned by someone that's already diseased, right? But there are some ethical issues about that. That's precisely the reason why we watched the last video that we watched. Okay, so I see some hands going up here. Maybe I said something that people want to respond to. Mr. White?
Yeah. I don't want to say I'm playing devil's advocate, but if if regulations change and they say, well, you can't prove, or you can't support the fact that the patient that donated the sample was properly informed. They say you can't say they properly consented to everything you're going to do with this sample. They, just like with the video we just watched, they gave their sample for diabetes research. Turned out that it was used for diabetes and other stuff. Let's say you don't have a group coming back to you saying that's a problem. You just have these samples and they say you can't, we don't know if you went through IRB, whatever the case may be. Do you just throw those out and just move on? Do you say, well, I can't, this whole freezer is dump out the liquid nitrogen, there's no more use to this? But on the flip side, those are precious. You can't just go out. I mean, if it was a rat, I could spend $50-$60, get a Sprague Dawley, grow a tumor in about a month, maybe 2 months, start over. Probably I wouldn't want to do it, be a little bit more expensive, but I could technically remake that sample. But if it's a person, I can't just go out and, some lay person like, give me some blood. They're not going to do it.
Right.
So is there any kind of thinking within regulation, within policy to say, we can't just we shouldn't just throw these out. Like, we just can't, these are irreplaceable. They're precious. So we might not be able to prove chain of custody or whatever, but we can't get those back if we just say, let's throw out everything and just start over beginning next year or whatever they say. So I don't know if that's out there in the conversation, but.
All right. So that's why I made that statement about the new rule says all of those research, all of those tissues that are already in the freezer that you are talking about, all the research going on with them will be grandfathered in. Do you know what that means? It means the sort of question that you are raising would not arise. You'll be allowed to continue the research as it is, because let me tell you, like thousands of comments were made, and this new rule is coming out of serious consideration of each one of those comments. I don't know whether you are aware of it or not. Months, the draft was available in the Federal Register for months for public comment. All right? So it wasn't a willy-nilly kind of thing. But nevertheless, there are still some aspects of this that are concerning, is what I'm saying. But they've already thought about, what a waste would it be for us to throw out those, what some researchers are calling national treasures. Okay, you have your hand up?
Yeah,
Dr. Samuel.
I kind of get conflicted about the role that you said precision medicine is going to follow. And in precision or perhaps personalized medicine, the ultimate goal is to treat, just the way I mentioned earlier, the individual as an individual, and is targeted to that individual. And from researchers' perspective, that is like a study subject of N. N equals 1, which means you know who that person is. That's why you are doing that. So I feel conflicted about this issue, how it goes well with precision or personalized medicine. And I feel from what you said, I think and what Dr. May said, is the gatekeeping is, I think, the critical point, where perhaps most discussions and resolutions can go into. But I think the way medicine is moving forward, that is kind of conflicting to me. That's just my thought.
Yeah. So before we get to by the way, it's not an easy shot. Okay. Before we get to the kind of end goal of treating one person at the right time with the right kind of medicine for the right reason, is still, further down the line. But there are research using available specimen that we cannot afford to throw away in order to get to that point where we will say, if we get an individual that, say, colorectal cancer, for example, here are some genes that are associated with that, right? If a person shows up, for example, and we can do gene sequencing on this person with proper consent, and it seems to match, these are the steps we need to take next in order to figure out what is the right way to treat this person at this time with the right medicine so that it is just for that person. You see? You are a researcher yourself, and I know that there are so many steps to even get to that point. But that's the end goal, and we're not taking our eyes off the ball, right? Researchers, right? Are you out there, researchers? Yeah.
I was just going to say, if I'm an insurance company executive, I want to know who that one person is, because then I'm going to jack their premium up to $2 million a year or whatever in anticipation of that. what we're sort of bleeding in my comments over into the 3 o'clock session, but I think what's coming along, as I see it, is that what the film was quite gripping about the use of physical specimens such as blood. But I think frankly, the new frontier is data. Everybody has an electronic health record, I presume, in this room. Everybody, we're all sort of Henrietta Lacks potentially in sitting here, because at some point our data could be on an aggregated basis be used to advance the realm of precision medicine and scientific advance. But at the same time, it also, we can't anticipate what those future developments are going to be. And when I go into a hospital and sign all those disclaimers, I like to think I sign them more intelligently when I sign up for an app from Google or something of the sort, and I just go right to, go right through all the fine print, and I just say, give me the damn app, and sign my life away potentially. But I think we're in an area, and the 21st Century Cures Act that was signed into law by President Obama in December sort of brings this to the question to the fore, is what control should we or do we have over that in what is going to be an exponentially increasing amount of information that's available to us that becomes the source of future scientific investigation.
I thank you, sir, for mentioning that. That translation of research data, which is going to be big, the interpretation of it, which well now is called big data, right, is going to take on a new meaning so far as informed consent is concerned. There are a number of things that are concerning about big data as well. And I'm sure Dr. May is aware.
I was just going to say that the great irony of precision medicine is that the application is ideally an N of one, but the science to get to that application is an N of millions or billions.
That's right.
And
there are so many steps.
And there's, you just think of the reference genome, and then we identify this as possibly genetically based because you deviate from the reference genome in some way. How significant is that deviation? If it's a really rare disease and everybody with that rare disease has this same deviation, we can easily make a call. For more common diseases, we're going to need millions and millions or billions of reference points. And so the great irony is that application is an N of one, but the science to get to that is going to require huge data sets.
Did you want to say something, Dr. Shakir?
Well, you had a couple of things. In some ways, this discussion about the complexities starts to feel, like an impossible undertaking. But, I think the confusion is in every field. You know what I mean? It's because if you talk about the legal system, if you talk about education, if you talk about the economic apparatus, it's all kind of in a similar state. So I just feel like, we have to keep persevering. And my hope is that we're at a special time too, where change seems impossible, but that really, I believe and want to believe that we're right at the cusp of possible some significant changes. And I think because it is in every system, illustrates how the worldview that was held is what created it. And the worldview, in some ways, not completely, but is like profits over people. That's one of the things. And time is money, and and so on and so forth. But it's the worldview, and so all of these complex and difficulties that we have in every system that we live in is under great scrutiny. the other thing that I, wanted to say was, like the legal aspects, the settlements, and how little money that really is. And I'm wondering, like who were their attorneys?
Just over $1,000 of
Yeah, and then, and that was true for the Henrietta Lacks family members, while their ancestor provided billions of dollars, for research, right? And then the same with the syphilis study. They got $10 million, like for a 40-year study. And then now I'm looking at this woman, what's her name? Sophia Stewart. She got a $2.5 billion settlement because she wrote The Matrix. And they just settled. I mean, that's not anything to do with what we're talking about, but she had some good attorneys probably, but it also took 10 years for her to get that. So, and then like on the gatekeepers, like if we get these gatekeepers, they have to have a critical consciousness, because sometimes you can get the gatekeepers and, just because they are of Native American persuasion or African American or whatever, it does not mean that they will function any differently. So I think that's really important. So in a lot of ways, we have to create, like more of these training courses. We need a curriculum, and it's like people need to be held to some kind of standard if they're going to genuinely represent the interest of the community or of the individuals.
Okay. So, so he's watching the watchers, huh? Okay. Any other? There's some comment on the. Okay, folks out there joining us by satellite. Any comments? Comment out
Yes,
there? All right, go
yes.
ahead. We can hear
This is
you loud and clear.
okay. This is Lucia again. So I'd like to circle back to what Bob said. Truthfulness in informed consent. I know that not all of these issues can be solved by an informed consent process, but by the same token, that doesn't absolve us from the responsibility of truly explaining, especially in the cases that you were discussing before, of broad-based consent for future unspecified genetic studies, what exactly this means. It means that we don't actually know what we are going to find. So we need to be able to explain it in a clear, unequivocal manner, and respect the answer that comes. Now, as a researcher, I do anticipate that very useful, life-saving information can come from these things. But we need to be able to be clear with potential participants that we don't actually know what we are going to do. And that's a reality. I mean, I'll give you a practical example having to do with big data research. And I'll try to do so without breaching confidentiality. I am aware of a study that has been conducted by a group looking at large numbers of medical records. What they found, assuming that this finding is true and it is reproducible, it's not published yet, is that cancer patients who have another disease and take another medication, which is actually a cheap and readily accessible one, have a much lower risk of metastasis. If this is true, this is invaluable information. It was not a hypothesis-driven study. These people did not know what they were looking for. They looked for associations between whatever these patients had and risk of metastasis, and came up with this finding, which, if confirmed, could save a lot of lives. They would not have been able to do this if they hadn't had permission to access these de-identified medical records. So now we have a tension between control of the information and usefulness of the information. I don't believe it can be resolved without us being able to honestly tell all participants that we consent, things may come out of your data or your DNA that we don't actually know at this point. Are you comfortable with the idea of us digging into that to find correlations that may not be obvious, because we can't know everything? Again, it takes humility, going back to what we talked about this morning.
Yeah.
But in my experience, when I have said things like that to potential participants, for example, in the tissue biorepository that we created when I was in my previous institution, and when I have said it clearly enough, I have not encountered a negative reaction. I have encountered a reaction that was actually indicative of the participants being happy that I was being honest. So we can go a long way with honesty and truthfulness, and as you said before, humility.
Thank you so much. I see two other hands up here.
I'd just like to add to that. I don't disagree with that, but I think it's a double-edged sword too. We often like to think of informed consent in our traditional medical paradigms, and that's where, if I'm diagnosed with whatever, lung cancer, right, that has a direct effect on me. And it may make, or I hope it, well, I don't hope it makes my family sad, but it probably will make my family sad, but it doesn't have any implications in terms of their physical health, right? But genomic data is not like that. What we find from genomic data has implications not just for me, but for people who share my genetic traits.
Absolutely.
Right? And so when we think of something like the Havasupai tribe, it doesn't matter how open and honest we were. It still leaves the following question. What if there are a half dozen Havasupai tribe members who think, okay, I'll agree for you to use my data that way, and then what's learned has implications for the entire tribe? Right? So I think that our old paradigms of informed consent about the implications of what we're doing, of this intervention being just about the person upon whom we're getting consent, aren't really going to be adequate for really working through these big data problems and in the genomic era.
Okay. That's an interesting perspective right there. And I hope we are logging these things in terms of actionable items that we need to keep in mind as we move before we move to the community, to do our homework very well and think through these things carefully as our attentions are being called to it today. Dr. Yates.
Yeah, so as is occurring to me that and I do it all the time. Sometimes we use big data, we don't know exactly what we're looking for, but we have a framework of what we're looking for. And the situation that we saw in the video, they went completely outside of diabetes into another area. So it sort of occurs to me that broad blanket consent is going to be necessary. I commented on the common rule several times in that process. But we can clearly tell folks what we're not going to do. So there may be scientific questions. We brought up cancer for an extra day. Okay, we're not quite sure in the cancer area what questions we're going to ask for technology, but we're not going to ask this type of question. Or we're not going to use the genomic data for these. And if that occurs, then that's when the additional consent has to go back. You have to go back to the participant and receive that. That seems to me to be a sort of bridge between the two worlds. And that's it would probably be fair to our researchers who could say, okay, you can ask cancer-related questions. You have a cancer disease, you have cancer tissue cancer, you can ask cancer, but you can't ask other types of questions outside of that unless you get reconsent.
Okay, that's something worthy of note as well. I see you got the mic there. Did you want to comment on something? And I've got to wrap this part of it up. Okay. See, I thought that 45 minutes would be enough to to discuss this thing. But apparently, you know, some burning issues are still out there, and I know out there, in here and out there, for those of you that are joining us by satellite, maybe those are the kinds of issues that should be included in a future bioethics forum of this nature. Uh, and I want to, that's at the point at which I want to invite Dr. Chaplin, because whether you know it or not, it's already 3 o'clock. All right, so we're having fun, and time really goes so fast, you know, when you're having fun. I won't do the take home because I think that we already hit some of the take home points that I have here. Help us, though, to document those things that you are thinking about so that we don't lose them, so that they can become a subject of perhaps next set of forums like this. Dr. Chaplin, would you please take over here? Remember our evaluation, please, and what the incentive is for doing that. Ms. Top will collect our evaluation.
So, firstly, as we're all going to be rushing out soon, I think I just really want to thank Professor Shodeke and Dr. Shakir and Ms. Lee, and especially Brian Wallace, who's helped us to all communicate with each other, and all the people who really made this happen for all the effort, and everybody for really a frank and open discussion. Thanks. This has really been a very exciting day. I think it's been terrific. So I don't want to have to take any notes because I'm not very quick at going from voice to paper. So when people give ideas, I hope you'll pick up the microphones, because then we can go back and recreate what your suggestions are effectively. So, you know, what I hoped we would do now is to reflect back on the day, and we can't absolutely predict what issues are going to be the most pressing ones 6 months or 12 months from now, but we will have at least one more session like this in the next 12 months. If there's a feeling that there would be value to having more frequent ones, we will absolutely be happy to help make it happen. It may not have to be everybody face to face. We've seen that distance participants could add rich content to the discussion very effectively, so I don't think we have to be bound by that. But if we want to have sessions in some other venues or back here, we'll arrange it. So I'm really looking for thoughts about what issues are the most crucial ones for future discussion. You know, I don't personally work in these kinds of large studies. I was impressed myself that there are aspects of where the vulnerabilities around research lie that the river of blood showed me. I didn't really think of a group having sensitivities that were as acute as the ones we saw. I certainly appreciate the fact that one of the areas where bioethics needs to play a big role is in how large amounts of data are turned into policy, that's done in a way that has strong bioethical roots. Dr. Culbertson mentioned concerns about what insurance companies do with genomic data, and I think at the individual level, there can be pretty clear policies that can prevent somebody from having their individual insurance rates jacked up. But how society reacts to societal issues are more complicated and need other kinds of support. So anyway, there's a lot of different kinds of issues, and I think we could be paralyzed by how complex they are, or we could pick individual ones to try to focus on for the future. So I open it up for comment.
So, David, if I could, I think the discussion on the common rule and some of the changes implied in that or stated in that are stimulated a lot of interest. I think we only began to scratch the surface of those. And without being too proscriptive, I think sooner rather than later, further group discussion of the common rule and the implications of that, and what do we mean by consent. And I'd like to explore both the overlap and the areas that do not overlap between what an IRB does and bioethical considerations, because an IRB is all about safety. And we have not been talking about safety. We've been talking about what's right. You know, we can debate how we balance those two. Obviously, both are important. But I would encourage us to think about is there a way we can pursue that in the relatively near future? Because I think it's really important for all of us, even when we think about big data. Tom, when you talked about, well, gee, what happened with the Supai, it involves the tribe, but in fact it doesn't, because those 5 people informed something for the family of man, not just for the Supai tribe. And so well, you can tell I'd love to continue these conversations. I think they're really important for us. My hope would be that one of the consequences of that is not so much that we come out with very discrete answers. I'm not sure that's the outcome. But what might come out would be a heightened awareness of our responsibility collectively, whether we're investigators or participants, and that is part of what's going to drive us moving forward to enable to pursue some of the questions that we want to pursue in the way that is the appropriate way, the right way. So that's my pitch for at least one of the topics for a follow-on discussion.
Other suggestions? Any of our colleagues on GoToMeeting?
I
Yes,
completely endorse what Bob just said.
Okay. Thank you, Lucio.
Thank you, Lucio.
Good.
Dr. Knight?
This is Sarah Knight.
Yeah. Please, Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. Everything that we talked about today was quite meaningful, and I agreed very much with what Dr. Kimberly just said. I think as I've gotten more involved in community engagement activities and also stakeholder engaged research more generally, it strikes me that there are many ethical issues to discuss around those topics. And I would appreciate an opportunity at some point for there to be that discussion of engaged research, both in terms of community engaged research, but when you bring other stakeholders in that, for example, potentially could have be in positions of power with respect to community members. What are some of the considerations we should be sensitive to? And I really liked Dr. Kimberly's comment that we're not really looking for answers so much as to build an awareness and greater sensitivity to these potential issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts, Andy?
Yeah, I with the blood journey, where they zoomed in on the informed consent passage that was talking about the broad options for the samples that they were going to give, it really struck me that there's a really deep health literacy issue to this, and that health literacy trainings can help raise awareness on all sides, whether the recipients are the folks who are going to potentially participate or the folks who are, on the research side. So, insofar as I know that's not directly ethics per se, but what are people doing in health literacy in our state, and are those efforts things that we could piggyback on in any way to help address ethics? So,
Interesting question. I'll have to defer to others to answer, but it's something we can try to get more information about. Other thoughts? So maybe this fits in with what Dr. Kimberly was suggesting, but it's been really encouraged by the CTSA administration, higher administration, that partner networks need to use common IRBs, which, as Dr. Kimberly has said, doesn't mean that we have to absolve ourselves from individual levels of ethical behavior, but that we have common efforts to assure safety. But what that really means and how we choose to implement it in the way that protects our subjects and the community the most effectively seems an additional topic that may be part of what we're talking about. Dr. Shakir.
It seemed to me that still that less than 0.1% of the human genome and the impact of the social determinants on the human genome or on the genes is an area of inquiry that absolutely should be explored, because I think that we can all attest that, it has a pretty powerful effect, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to piggyback on what Dr. Shakir just said, when we specify that 0.01%, we have to put it in proper context, I guess is the better way. I think, because it's interesting, I had a student say that to me, and I'm like, well, do you know how many base pairs on the human genome? She was like, no. It's like, it's 3 billion base pairs. So that 0.1% or 0.01% is a lot bigger on that scale, right? So you got a larger scale. When you think about SNPs and the impact people are, or researchers are saying that has on health, SNPs is one base pair difference. So it's hard it's easier, I guess, to a layperson for them to say 99.99% compared to 0.01%. They think, oh, it's a lot more common than not. So we're all the same. But there's more to that than just that percentage. And then second to that, I think it's important to have people, when you put it in that context, people can then understand that, it's more than just that percentage. But on top of that, the reference means something too. Who is your reference? So when they first did the human genome, it was an N of one guy, right? And so I think now it's like the average of maybe 19 to 20 individuals or something like that. But even still, who are those 19 individuals? So just having that reference is great. It's wonderful. We sequenced it, but that reference means something. And if that reference isn't representative of everybody, well, then your reference could be wrong. So I think when we discuss that, and specifically that percentage, because you hear it come up, because people mention it in general conversation, and policymakers can say it, and it sounds really cute, and people can understand it, but there's more to it than just that. So I think that's an important distinction or distinctions to make.
Yes.
Yeah, but back to what you're saying, there is epigenomics, so many things that take consideration in the gene expression profile that would alter, and what you eat and everything. So I think that the social or what you eat and all of those things will have effect. So I think it's still way bigger than just the 0.1%. The 0.1% is important. There are races and ethnicities and all, but there is other story.
Well, any other comments? Yes, Dr. Samuel.
Yeah, ideally, given the historical context and what happened and what we learned, we would think that, okay, some of these things should not even be raised, or we shouldn't be talking about some of these things. but I think it's not as the consensus was. I think it's not going away that quick. And also, as the new generation comes up, these issues will still have to be brought to them. When the literacy issue came, it's not just the community, but also the future researchers, future doctors, future geneticists. Everyone should continuously be made aware of these issues and be made sensitive to these topics. So I think bringing these into curricula of every medical school, every department that will eventually work with any of these topics, I think would be something that can be acted upon and probably introduced at some point. That way it continues to be discussed, not just among researchers, but also the future generation.
I don't know if any of the people in the room or online actually participate in teaching in venues where this kind of material could be introduced, but I'd really encourage us to use each other as resources to figure out the best material that should be presented. I've been impressed that Professor Shodake is very committed to bringing actionable information out of this kind of gathering and making an enduring document that can be published. And I think many of you may have an opportunity to give us some input into what the format of that kind of document should be. And if there are additional thoughts other than a sort of concept of what this kind of meeting can generate that we should be aiming for, we'd very much look for your input. Brian's signaling that there
was a comment online, Jamie Richards. On a practical level, how do we engage basic scientists and community members in these types of conversations? And also piggybacking off the lesson that Dr. Shodake shared about the elephant in perspective without talking to the community and basic scientists, how do you resolve some of the tactical issues that arise when actually conducting a scientific study or in the data interpretation for these studies?
Well, there's the topic for the next meeting. That's big. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Richards. That's a great set of challenges. I just encourage you to recognize that Dr. May is on your campus and that you could engage each other in a more enduring conversation of how to spread these issues within the Hudson Alpha community, how we do it. And I know that you're in contact through distance sharing with the genetics and genomics graduate program at UAB. And so I think one of the things that would be great is to figure out venues where we can share this kind of discussion and make sure that the future discussions can involve more people. This was a really actually very good size, I thought, for giving everybody a chance to participate. A 200-person meeting would be very different, but eventually we'd like to be sure we touch as broad a community as possible. Bob?
David, if I could just make one or ask an operational question. This is the first time we've used the GoToMeeting to get people to participate at a distance. And it would be great both from the organizers and speakers to get your sense of how it's worked with people coming in, but also then from the people who are listening, how did it work for them?
Right. So actually, we have a brief emailed questionnaire that will come to all of you. I'm afraid we didn't ask your consent for being able to send you this, but I guarantee it can be finished thoroughly within 3 to 4 minutes. You can choose to give a lot more feedback than is the minimum if you'd like to. And you can certainly call to tell us your opinions rather than sending on paper or electronic information back. But that I'm not sure if it'll come before Monday because I'm going to be away tomorrow, but we'll try to get it out to you soon enough that you haven't lost the feeling of how this worked for you. Certainly, well, I'd like Dr. Shakir and Dr. Shodake to be able to give input, but I think from my perspective, the participation of offsite people was in every way positive and not interrupting, and was really an enriching part of the experience. Any other thoughts?
I think just like a comment, just respond to Dr. Samuel's like teaching curriculum. So I teach a class like molecular biology, and it's like I made the student to make presentations about like any like a research topics. Like it's amazing. Like most of the time, a lot of students they choose bioethical like issues. So the young generation they do pay more attention to this kind of like problems. So it would be really a great like idea to add more like a value or like weight on this kind of topics, probably like ask a student to involve more about this kind of discussion. I think it would be really helpful. Like for us, we started thinking about this when we like at this moment, like it would be great if we really like before we even generate research ideas, we can just okay, raise alert, okay, you stop and look and think and then go, rather than like them you collected all the like we call specimens, but they think that's part of their body. So that's the comment.
Dr. Shodake.
So everyone is aware that we had some challenges with technology just as we got started. These technologies are great when they work. And I'm familiar with GoToMeetings because I do it from Tuskegee to like 5 or 6 different sites who are joining through the portal of UAB. And I have been doing that for a few years now. But just this last time, very recently, the technology didn't work. The real presence that was supposed to be on at UAB, so everybody was dialing into the number, but they couldn't get anywhere. And I was sitting there at Tuskegee trying to do the lecture. So I ended up doing the lecture over my cell phone. And they thought, well, that worked out very well too. So I would be interested in seeing what the feedback of those neighbors joining us by satellite would be. I think it can work very well if we can choose a place and we have people that know exactly what they're doing, like this gentleman here that got us out of the pickle, and Mr. White and Mr. Webb. So that's my impression of it. It can work very well when the technology works, but if the technology does not work and there is no plan B, well, we're done.
Right.
I wanted to just comment on the extraordinary humility I feel that the people in this group represent. I'm really touched and very impressed. I wish Dr. Culberson was still here to hear me say this. But I think that all of those of you that are in the leadership roles, Dr. Chaplin and Kimberly, and is it Mays, and is everyone else like scholars, or are you all like in the leadership roles?
These are scientists.
Okay, well, no, I know that part. Okay, so, but anyway, everybody, I didn't really get to know the two doctors in the back, but everybody's comments have just been really, really on point. And what I think would be a great conversation too, after maybe after a few of these to hear from each of us the ways in which we may have shifted in some way, and that becomes a type of qualitative research that then when we, if we publish something, we can include that.
Yeah, I think actually one of the things we need to do is all consent each other before we meet again, because, well, truly though, I mean, this is it's a kind of research of how groups of scientists work together to create new knowledge. So anyway, I think it's probably time to close. We're almost at 3:30.